I before E, except after C.
Professor Grammarian?
Confound it, Marge, can't you see I'm working on my theory of quantum semantics?
Yes, and I'm so sorry to disturb you, but there's been an errorist attack.
She's back?
Getting reports of fragment bombs, mass capitalization, subjects and verbs disagreeing in the streets.
Dash it all.
Ready my punctuagon, Marge. I must find her before...
Grammarian, darling, it's been too long.
Errorist.
What's all that behind you? It looks like the scribblings of a madwoman.
Never mind that. How did you pull off such a large-scale attack?
Well, while you've been patching comma splices, I've been building a droid army.
What? It can't be. Autocorrect works for me.
Oh, I'm afraid he's one of many unintelligence operatives on my payroll, helping to build a better world.
Imagine it, Grammarian. A world where whom is finally dead. Not on my page.
Comma splice,
Semicolon.
passive voice,
Reorder clauses.
run-on sentence!
Caret, semicolon, slash, close up, slash, 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 m dash, slash, caret, comma, caret, period. It's time I finally put a full stop to you, errorist. I was there when the laws were written. I'll be there when the ink runs dry. Professor Grammarian, the chalkboard. Meaning equals syntax times chaos squared? Chaos is the missing constant. Of course, grammatical structure needs to harness the generative power of chaos to create meaning. It's elegant.
It's brilliant.
Shall I alert the grammar police? Let them know she's on the loose?
No, she'll be deep in the margins by now, but I have a feeling we'll see her again before too long.
Professor? Your subtitle.
Great strunk!
An error!
Now that we've gone over the essential steps of the editing process and taken a closer look at clarity, flow, and how to keep a sentence from collapsing under the weight of its own ambition, we're going to turn our attention to grammar. This is not, I should stress, a comprehensive grammar course. If it were, we'd all need coffee, a whiteboard, and possibly a support group. Instead, this section focuses on the core grammatical issues that most often trip up even experienced writers, and by extension, the editors tasked with refining their work. We'll look at the usual suspects: agreement, consistency, misplaced modifiers, and those words that masquerade as their smarter siblings but mean something else entirely. None of this is new to you, but the goal is to sharpen your awareness. Because in editing, as in most things, it's what you don't notice that causes the most trouble. Let's get into it. We're starting with subject-verb agreement because, while it may look simple at first glance, it's a common source of error even in polished drafts. As editors, it's easy to gloss over the subject when the sentence seems fine on the surface, but agreement issues can sneak in when the subject is more complex than it appears. Let's start with compound subjects. When two subjects are joined by and, the verb should usually be plural. That's your default rule. The long hours of unpaid administrative work and the emotional toll of caregiving make volunteers more likely to burn out. This sentence has two separate subjects: the long hours of administrative work and the emotional toll of caregiving. Because they're joined by and, the compound subject is plural, so make is the correct verb. However, there are exceptions. These are constructions you'll want to recognize so you don't overcorrect. 1. When the two parts form a single unit or idea, like macaroni and cheese, we treat it as singular. Macaroni and cheese is my favorite dish. 2. When the subject is preceded by each or every, it's considered singular, even if there are two nouns. Every boy and girl is required to attend. And if both parts refer to the same person or thing, the verb stays singular. My friend and mentor has arrived. As editors, your job is to slow down and parse these constructions carefully. The grammar might not be flashy here, but the errors are easy to miss and easy to let slide if you're not paying close attention. Now let's look at compound subjects joined by or nor. In these cases, the verb agrees with the subject closer to it, what's often called the nearest noun rule. Take this sentence: neither John nor his friends are available. The verb agrees with friends, which is plural, so we use are. Now flip the order. Neither his friends nor John is coming. Now the subject nearest the verb is John, which is singular, so we use is. This isn't about fairness, it's about proximity. And here's an example that's trickier because of its length and complexity. Neither the physical borders of the State of Israel nor the violent conflict occurring within them defines Jewish identity for these students. At first glance, it may seem like borders is the subject, but in a neither nor construction, the verb agrees with the noun closest to it: conflict, singular subject, singular verb, defines. These constructions are easy to miss, especially in longer sentences. So slow down, locate the subject closest to the verb, and make sure agreement is intact.
When evaluating subject-verb agreement, don't get distracted by phrases that masquerade as compound subjects but don't actually affect the verb. Phrases like as well as, along with, together with, and in addition to may sound like they're adding another subject, but they're really just modifiers. The verb still agrees with the core subject, not the extra information. For example, the intern, as well as her mentors, is attending. Equally deceptive are noun phrases closer to the verb. These are especially tricky because our instinct is to match the verb with the noun we see immediately before it, even when that noun is part of a prepositional phrase. Take this sentence. The severity of the aftershocks following multiple large earthquakes has shaken the region's confidence. Even though earthquakes is plural and right next to the verb, the subject is severity, a singular noun, so the verb must be singular. Has, not have. Subject-verb agreement gets tricky when the subject isn't as straightforward as it looks. Sometimes what sounds plural isn't, because the subject is a collective noun or an indefinite pronoun. A collective noun refers to a group treated as a single unit, like team, jury, or staff. When these function as the subject of a sentence, they usually take a singular verb. The committee meets on Thursdays. But if we're emphasizing the individuals in the group, the verb can be plural. The jury were divided in their opinions. Indefinite pronouns like everyone, each, and nobody also demand singular verbs, even when they imply multiple people. So we say, each of the survivors was asked to recount their experience. Yet some pronouns, both, few, several, many, are explicitly plural. Several have returned from the light, claiming the afterlife had bad lighting and worse Wi-Fi. Not so fast, however. Before deciding whether to treat a collective noun or an indefinite pronoun as singular or plural, editors must assess the register of the piece.
When we talk about register, we're really talking about the level of formality in writing, and how that formality shifts depending on audience, purpose, and context. It's one of those quiet forces behind word choice, sentence structure, grammar, and even punctuation. As editors, we need to recognize when a sentence sounds off, not because it's grammatically wrong, but because it's written in the wrong register for the situation. And that's the trick. The rules don't always change, but the expectations do. Let's look at the 5 main types of register, moving from most formal to most personal. First is frozen. This is fixed, ceremonial language you'd find in legal declarations, religious texts, or traditional recitations. It's word for word, unchanging, and rarely edited. Formal register is structured and impersonal, used in academic writing, scholarly articles, curriculum guides, or technical manuals. It values precision over personality. Then we get to consultative, still professional, but more accessible. You'll see this in narrative nonfiction, educational materials, and many of the books we edit at iPub. It's informative, but human. Next is casual register, conversational, familiar, often personal. You'll find this in blog posts, memoirs, marketing copy, and anything with a voice. It's where grammar starts to flex a little. Contractions, sentence fragments, even rhetorical questions might show up. Finally, there's intimate register. This is deeply personal writing, used in letters, memoirs, and the voices of child narrators or close relationships. It's rare in formal publishing, but when it shows up, it's deliberate. And as editors, we need to know when to edit lightly or not at all, because what matters is tone, not textbook accuracy. Now let's see how register affects grammar, especially subject-verb agreement. The couple was thrilled with the photos. That's singular. The two people are being treated as one unit. The couple were arguing in the parking lot. Now we're treating them as two individuals. Both are correct. It depends on what you want to convey. Same with none of the students was late to class versus none of the students were late to class. Technically, none is singular, but were is more natural in casual or consultative writing. The difference isn't about what's wrong. It's about what fits. Register tells you what's expected.
When the subject follows the verb, inversions, agreement can slip. Train yourself to identify the true subject. Don't rely on what's nearest. Identify the sentence structure first. The sentence, "On the table sits a stack of books and a laptop," is an example of subject-verb inversion. The compound subject, "a stack of books and a laptop," follows the verb. Even though sits may sound more natural, the subject is plural, so the verb should be sit. On the table sit a stack of books and a laptop. Take a look at this next sentence. There seems to be several reasons why the trial failed to produce conclusive data. This inverted sentence is a bit trickier. At first glance, it might look fine, but let's break it down. The subject here is not the word there. There is just a placeholder, often used to signal that the true subject follows the verb. It's not what the verb should agree with. So what's the real subject? It's several reasons. Now look at the verb, seems. That's singular, but our subject, reasons, is clearly plural. So this is a subject-verb agreement error, masked by inversion. The correct version is, there seem to be several reasons why the trial failed to produce conclusive data. Whenever you see there is, or there are, or any variation like there seems to be, always double check what follows. That's where the real subject lives. Let's do one more. Only by applying these obscure algorithms has emerged a set of results that defy conventional interpretation. I know this seems confusing, but we can unpack it by isolating the true subject and aligning it with the right verbs. First, this is an inverted construction. The normal word order would be, a set of results that defy conventional interpretation has emerged, only by applying these obscure algorithms. But for emphasis, the sentence flips that around. The subject is a set of results that defy conventional interpretation. Here, set is the head noun, the main part of the subject. Everything else modifies it. The main verb is has emerged. So we ask, what has emerged? A set has emerged. This part is correct. Now look at this part. That defy conventional interpretation. If set is the main subject, why isn't this verb singular? Because this clause isn't modifying set, it's modifying what? Results, which is plural. It's grammatically correct, but cognitively tricky because both nouns appear close together and the inversion places the verb before the subject. That's why careful editors must untangle sentence structure before making changes, or calling something an error that isn't one. As editors, we're not grammar police. Our job is to recognize when a writer is intentionally bending a rule for effect, emphasis, or voice, and to know when that's okay. Especially in academic and nonfiction work, it's critical to distinguish between errors that truly disrupt clarity and choices that are stylistically deliberate. You'll often find yourself balancing prescriptive grammar rules, what we were taught in school, with corpus-based style, or what's actually common and accepted in modern usage. When in doubt, prioritize clarity, consistency, and formality appropriate to the register, not just whether something is technically correct. So rather than flagging every deviation from a rule, focus on whether it breaks the reader's understanding, whether it disrupts tone or consistency, and whether it undermines the credibility of the voice. We aim to mark inconsistencies, not stylistic nuance. That's what separates sharp, empathetic editing from robotic rule enforcement.
Next up, tense consistency. This one trips up more writers than they realize. An unexpected shift in tense can blur timelines, confuse readers, or just make things feel off. As editors, we're not just checking verbs, we're tracking logic. Let's talk about tense. It's one of those things writers often feel more than consciously control, and that's exactly why editors need to pay attention. In nonfiction, especially academic or analytical writing, tense is more than grammar. It carries rhetorical weight. It helps the reader know what's being asserted now, what was claimed before, and what still holds true. Our job is to flag any shift that seems unintentional or that introduces ambiguity. The challenge is that not all tense shifts are errors. Some are deliberate and even effective. So we need to be precise in identifying whether a shift makes sense in context or whether the writer just drifted. Here are 3 examples where the shift might look fine at first glance, but on closer inspection raise questions. Augustine emphasizes the necessity of divine grace in his writings, yet he argued that free will plays a role in human salvation. There's a subtle disconnect between emphasizes in the present and argued in the past. Are we describing Augustine's current influence or summarizing his historical position? Both are grammatically correct, but mixing them muddies the rhetorical frame. If we're treating Augustine as an active voice in modern theology, both verbs should be present. If we're looking at him historically, both should be past. The study explored patterns of behavior in early childhood and finds a correlation between unstructured play and increased verbal fluency. This kind of thing is incredibly common in academic writing. The study explored past tense, but then suddenly finds. That shift only works if the writer is treating the findings as timeless truths. But even then, the sentence structure doesn't support that distinction. It just reads like the writer lost track of the narrative frame. To fix this, we either keep everything in past tense, found a correlation, or rework the whole sentence so the present tense findings come from a present tense summary of the study. Nietzsche believed that morality originates from social constructs, and this framework continues to influence contemporary ethics. This one's more philosophically slippery. We have believed, past tense, and then continues, present tense. Is the writer saying that Nietzsche's framework specifically continues to influence ethics, or are they making a broader claim about modern ethics more generally? The fix depends on what's actually being argued. If we're talking about Nietzsche's own ideas and their reach, we could say his framework continued to influence. But if the second clause is a separate assertion about modern ethics, then the tense shift is appropriate. We just need to make the structure reflect that distinction. When writing academically, choosing the correct tense isn't just about grammar, it's about signaling to your reader how information should be interpreted. Use the present tense when discussing a source's argument or idea. This indicates that the author's perspective is still active or relevant. For example, Smith argues that identity is socially constructed. The present tense also applies when referring to a broader scholarly consensus. It maintains the tone of an active, ongoing discussion. For example, research shows a link between stress and memory. When describing a specific study that was conducted in the past, use the past tense to reflect the time-bound nature of that research. For example, researchers conducted a longitudinal study in 2017. The authors surveyed 120 people. Similarly, past tense should be used when reporting historical data or context. This maintains chronological clarity. For instance, the data were collected in 1998. When interpreting findings or analyzing data, shift back to the present tense. This frames your analysis as part of the current academic conversation. For example, the results support a growing theory of digital overstimulation. Finally, when connecting past research to present claims, use a mix of past and present tense. The study itself is in the past, but its implications are ongoing. For instance, the study found that sleep deprivation impairs memory. This suggests long-term impact. When it comes to tense, clarity isn't optional. It's everything. So before you move on, pause and ask yourself these 4 questions. First, does the timeline make sense from the reader's point of view? You might know when something happened, but your reader doesn't live in your head. Make sure the timeline tracks logically on the page, not just in your brain. Second, are tense shifts deliberate or accidental? Intentional shifts can add depth. Flashbacks, hypotheticals, reflections, but if you're hopping between past and present like a time-traveling squirrel, it's time to tighten up. Third, is the anchor tense clearly established? Every piece needs a tense home base. Readers can handle a few side trips, but they need to know where they're coming back to. Make that anchor tense obvious early on. 4. Could smoother transitions help signal time shifts? Even if the grammar is correct, abrupt changes in time can be jarring. Look out for missing transitions like later, at that moment, or years before. They help guide the reader and keep the tense shifts from feeling random. The goal here isn't just correct verb forms, it's clarity. Tense mistakes might not always be loud, but they quietly confuse the reader. So be the editor who notices what others miss. Let's move on to parallelism, one of those issues that's easy to spot when it's glaringly wrong, but often missed when it's just slightly off. As editors, our job is to recognize when structure is working and when it's quietly unraveling a sentence's rhythm or meaning. Parallelism is the practice of aligning grammatical elements when they perform the same function. It isn't limited to lists, it also applies to matched phrases, coordinated clauses, and paired constructions. Parallel structure strengthens clarity, reinforces rhythm, and helps the reader intuitively follow your sentence, even when the content gets complex or delightfully strange. Let's look at how it works in 3 different forms. First, we have an example of parallel infinitive phrases. She claimed to watch the ID channel to understand criminal minds, to stay alert to danger, and to hone the instincts that somehow missed the fact that she'd locked 3 men in her basement. Each item in the list, to understand, to stay, and to hone, shares the same form. That repetition of the infinitive structure makes the sentence feel deliberate and cohesive. Next, we see paired clause parallelism using a correlative conjunction. Not only did she dig the graves herself beneath the guise of historic cemetery restoration, but she also left each headstone blank, just in case she needed to come back and fill in the names later. This construction not only but also requires that the clauses on both sides follow the same grammatical shape. Here, both contain full verb phrases introduced by helping verbs did dig and did leave. That keeps the balance intact. Finally, we have parallel gerund phrases in a compound object. He excelled at ghosting his therapist, gaslighting his roommate, and mansplaining emotional intelligence to women he just met. Ghosting, gaslighting, and mansplaining are all gerunds serving as objects of the preposition at. Because they match in form and follow the same pattern, the sentence flows smoothly, despite the increasingly dubious behavior being described. So, across these 3 examples, We're not just looking at lists. We're seeing how parallelism operates at the level of verbs, phrases, and even full clauses. As we move through the rest of this lesson, we'll dig deeper into the nuances of each type. As copy editors, you're not expected to revise for rhetorical structure, but it's important to recognize it. You won't usually be asked to edit for this kind of nuance, but knowing how rhetorical parallelism works means that when something feels off, you'll be able to identify it and flag it if needed, because parallelism is a rhetorical powerhouse. It brings order to ideas, builds rhythm, and creates emphasis through structure. Writers use it to sharpen contrast, amplify meaning, or drive a point home. When it's done well, you feel it. When it's off, even slightly, it can make a sentence feel awkward, even if you can't immediately say why. So as we move through these next examples, think less like a mechanic and more like a tuning fork. You don't need to fix the notes, but you should be able to hear when something's out of tune. Here are a few powerful ways that parallelism shapes meaning and impact. Antithesis sets two contrasting ideas in parallel form. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Dr. King was a master of rhetoric. This famous sentence contrasts two concepts: color of their skin and content of their character, both framed in matching grammatical structure. The contrast is sharpened because the form is balanced. Climactic structure builds intensity or scope through parallel phrasing. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The repetition of that creates a rhythmic layering, each clause reinforcing and escalating the previous one. This is classic climactic parallelism. The structure remains consistent while the ideas expand. Rhetorical repetition uses parallelism to emphasize and invert. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Here, the mirrored structure highlights the reversal of roles and responsibilities. It's also a form of chiasmus, where elements are repeated in reverse order, but the underlying strength comes from the parallel syntax that makes the contrast memorable. Parallelism also shows up in how phrases are repeated and where that repetition occurs. Anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. The repetition of we shall fight builds rhythm and reinforces resolve. Each phrase gains strength from the one before it. Epistrophe places the repetition at the end of each clause. That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Here, the repeated phrase the people creates unity and emphasis through a kind of echo at the close of each segment. Isocolon uses balanced clauses, similar in both length and rhythm. To err is human, to forgive divine. Each half is structured the same, which gives the sentence symmetry and rhetorical punch. It sounds final, not just because of what it says, but how evenly it's built. In copy editing, you're not expected to create these structures, but you should know how to spot them. When rhetorical parallelism is working, it can elevate meaning and strengthen voice. When it's slightly off, it can throw the rhythm or weaken the point, even if the grammar is technically fine. You don't need to revise for this level of style, but if something feels off, this gives you the vocabulary to describe it, and the confidence to flag it if needed. Because strong structure isn't just good writing, it's something a sharp editor can recognize and protect. When editing for parallelism, ask yourself a few key questions. First, are all items in the list the same part of speech or grammatical structure? Mixing forms can make a sentence feel disjointed, even if it's technically correct. Next are paired ideas using symmetrical phrasing. Parallelism sharpens the contrast or connection between ideas. Structure matters as much as meaning. Then, does the comparison structure match? If you're comparing two things, they need to be presented in a similar grammatical format. Mismatched comparisons weaken clarity. And finally, would the sentence improve with repetition or consistency? A well-mirrored structure can clarify intent, strengthen rhythm, and elevate tone without adding any words at all. Now for a lightning round of fundamentals. Things like lay versus lie, who versus whom, that versus which. These are the kinds of details that can make or break a sentence's clarity, and they're often where even strong writers stumble. Knowing how to spot and fix them quickly is part of what sets good editors apart. Let's look at one of the most commonly confused verb pairs in English, lay and lie. The confusion often comes from the overlapping forms, particularly in the past tense. Lay is a transitive verb. It requires a direct object. You lay something down. Its forms are lay in the present, laid in the past, and laid again as the past participle. Lie, by contrast, is intransitive. It does not take a direct object. You simply lie down. Its forms are lie in the present, lay in the past, and lain as the past participle. Let's look at some examples. I was so tired I just lay on the couch. That's the past tense of lie. No object, just you, collapsing. The baby had lain there quietly for an hour. That's the past perfect of lie. Again, no object, just the baby, being stationary. The toddler is laying her stuffed animals in a perfect row before bedtime. Here, laying is correct because she's placing objects. The action is being done to something. The key is always this: if there's an object, it's lay. If not, it's lie. Let's take a moment to clear up a common issue in editing: the difference between who and whom. Writers often get them wrong, but editors need to know how to check. It's all about function. Who acts as the subject of a clause. Whom is used as the object. Here's a simple test. Try swapping in a pronoun. If he, she, or they fits, the correct word is who. If him, her, or them makes more sense, go with whom. Example, he is calling. That tells you the right word is who. I should address the letter to him. That points to whom. As an editor, you're not rewriting, you're confirming that the grammar holds up. This gives you a quick way to verify which word belongs. Take a minute to look through each one and decide whether who or whom or whomever is correct. She only dates influencers who or whom she believes can explain AI ethics without citing ChatGPT. The correct word is who. In this clause, she believes who can explain. The pronoun is the subject of can explain. You'd say they can explain, not them can explain. So it's who. Whoever or whomever they said was ghostwriting the celebrity's climate memoir should probably stop tweeting about private jet offsets. The correct word is whoever. Ignore they said for a moment. The clause is whoever was ghostwriting, and the pronoun is the subject of was ghostwriting. That makes whoever the right choice. Who or whom should we blame for the resurgence of books with black covers, sad girls, and zero punctuation? The correct word is whom. Rearranged, it becomes we should blame whom. The pronoun is the object of blame, so you need whom. Whoever or whomever wrote that sentence clearly blacked out halfway through and woke up inside a Proust novel. The correct word is whoever. The pronoun is the subject of wrote. He wrote that sentence, not him wrote that sentence. That's a subject role, so it's whoever. Whomever or whoever the editor meant to reject, the fact remains that she mistakenly tagged them in a viral TikTok captioned, "This is why we don't publish fanfic." The correct word is whomever. Within the clause, the editor meant to reject whomever. The pronoun is the object of to reject, so even though the clause appears at the beginning, whomever is still correct. Take a look at these sentences. If I were taller, I'd dunk. I wish she were here. If this weren't boring, it wouldn't be in this workshop. Notice anything odd? In each one, we're using were instead of was, even though the subject is singular. That's because we're in the land of hypotheticals, wishes, and things that just aren't true. In these kinds of constructions, were is the correct form, not was, even if your ear is telling you otherwise. This is one of those things that trips up even seasoned editors because was often feels more natural. But when you're dealing with a wish, an unreal condition, or a hypothetical, were is the form you want, full stop. If this were intuitive, it wouldn't need its own slide. Let's look at the difference between that and which. Use that for essential or restrictive clauses. These are clauses that provide critical information, and they do not take commas. Use which for non-essential or non-restrictive clauses. These add extra information and are always set off by commas. Here's how that looks in context. The book that has a red cover belongs to Sarah. The phrase that has a red cover tells us which book, so it's essential. No commas. The book which has a red cover belongs to Sarah. Here, the red cover is just extra information. We already know which book we're talking about, so this is non-essential, and it's wrapped in commas. Here are some more examples. A. The essay that leaned heavily on Wikipedia somehow passed the originality check. B. The essay which leaned heavily on Wikipedia somehow passed the originality check. C. The essay which leaned heavily on Wikipedia somehow passed the originality check. Both A and C are grammatically correct, but they serve different purposes. A uses a restrictive clause that leaned heavily on Wikipedia, which identifies which essay we're talking about. This implies there were multiple essays, and the one that leaned heavily on Wikipedia passed. C uses a non-restrictive clause, set off with commas, implying we already know which essay it is, and the Wikipedia detail is just extra commentary. B, on the other hand, is incorrect in formal writing. Let's move to the next. 1. The writing app that promises to think for you has a privacy policy that or which you should absolutely read. 2. The writing app that promises to think for you actually has a privacy policy that or which you should absolutely read. In the first sentence, that is the correct choice. It introduces an essential clause. We're specifying the privacy policy you should read, but in the second sentence, the word actually shifts the tone. It adds a layer of commentary or mild surprise, like, can you believe this app has a privacy policy worth reading? That rhetorical shift makes which a more fitting choice, because now the clause feels non-essential, more like an aside. So both that and which are grammatically acceptable here, but the tone you want matters. If you're aiming for dry emphasis or subtle irony, which is the better fit? Which of the following sentences is correct? A. The students that cheated were expelled. B. The students which cheated were expelled. Actually, neither is correct. The correct relative pronoun for people is who. That and which are typically reserved for things or animals. A. The students who cheated were expelled. B. The students who cheated were expelled. Now that the pronoun is correct, both sentences are grammatically acceptable, but they communicate different meanings. In the first version, the students who cheated were expelled. The clause who cheated is restrictive. It tells us which students were expelled, only those who cheated. The information is essential to the sentence's meaning, so no commas are used. In the second version, the students who cheated were expelled. The clause is non-restrictive. It assumes the audience already knows which students we're talking about and adds that all of them cheated. The implication here is that every student in the group cheated and was expelled, so both are correct, but they convey two very different ideas. The structure and punctuation determine whether the clause narrows the group or comments on it. Understanding the function of a clause, not just its grammar, is key to editing. The choice between that and which, or using commas or not, isn't just technical, it shapes meaning. A sentence can be correct on paper, but still misrepresent the author's intent. Good editors don't just fix errors, they ensure the writing says what it's meant to say. Always ask, what is this sentence really saying? And just as importantly, what might the reader think it's saying? That wraps up our section on grammar. We've looked at subject-verb agreement, tense consistency, parallelism, and some of the more frequently confused constructions. As editors, understanding grammar at this level isn't optional. It's what lets us spot issues that affect meaning, clarity, and tone, even when the sentence is technically correct. These aren't just academic points. They're practical tools that shape how language works on the page. If you're still unsure about any of the topics we've covered so far, I'll include links to some strong grammar resources at the end of the workshop. Nothing fluffy, just solid, practical guides. Up next, punctuation and mechanics, where we'll look at how the small marks on the page do a lot of heavy lifting.